program from Multilingual Media, and my name is Tucker Johnson, and I'm here today with the host of the Venn diagram, Michael Reid, who is just one of the most knowledgeable guys that I know in this industry, in about geopolitics, geocultural stuff, language. He's a linguist. I'll let him introduce himself later, because after all, this is his show. But since we're just getting started off here, let's give really quickly, what are we doing here? What are we trying to do with this new show that we're doing here, the Venn diagram? And we're calling it the Venn diagram because we want to talk about things that intersect with each other, such as business, such as culture, such as language, such as technology, all of these things that we work with on a day-to-day basis, but yet we like to talk about them in different formats, in different ways. So we're going to bring them all together into this new, somewhat long-form videocast type program here called the Venn diagram. And that is my my glorious intro, Michael.
I liked it. I liked it. I thought it was good.
Well, thank you, sir. And thanks for agreeing to do this here.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
You notice I'm over here on the right-hand side of the screen, which means you're going to be running this show here. So why don't you give us a little bit of an intro about, who are you? First of all, what is your relationship to Multilingual? What is your relationship to the work that we're doing here? And what is your vision for this show that we have?
Who am I, and why should you listen to anything I have to say?
Exactly.
No, it's a legitimate question. Well, of course, as you so capably introduced me, my name is Michael Reid. I am the managing editor of Multilingual. I got into this industry about 24 years ago. I started as a translator and interpreter, and then I took an extended detour through higher ed as a language professional, or a language professor, pardon me, and an administrator. And then after I left higher ed, I came back to my first love, my first passion, which was, of course, linguistics and translation and the language industry. And I was fortunate enough to become managing editor of Multilingual, and that's how I find myself here. That's my relationship to Multilingual, and this is why I do what I do. So, and I was really excited for the opportunity to do a show like this because, like you said, there are so many things that go into what we do. It's not just language, it's politics, it's culture, it's symbols, right? Symbology, all of these things, technology as well. I think we'll probably get to one of those stories today, and all of these things have a direct impact on our lives, whether we realize it or not. And sometimes we don't even realize what all of the intersections are. So I'm just really happy to have a vehicle to talk about those things, because I think there are people who really care about them and maybe aren't even aware of some of the ways in which these things intersect.
Right. And this isn't coming out of the blue either, right? Like we've been tell us a little bit about the background on where this the topics that we're talking about, where it comes from, what we do. Talk about that.
So this all sort of started as the project, the Guilt Call. I believe that's your official name for it.
The Guilt, GILT. It's not the Guilt. GILT.
Yeah, not guilt as in, we feel so bad.
Yeah. The globalization, internationalization, localization, translation spells guilt. So,
so without the U, just so there's no mistaking that.
No white guilt.
No,
I thought it was guild for a long time, like a guild, like a medieval guild. But no, it's guilt.
When it was first explained to me, I actually thought that too. I was like,
exactly.
Okay, guild, got it. And then I saw the spellings, like, nope, that is not it. So, but no, in that call, there are a lot of discussions about exactly these types of things, the intersection of culture, politics, business, language. And as we were having those discussions, we realized that it would be nice to sort of bring them to a larger forum. And oftentimes there was so much discussion that it really couldn't even fit within the confines of one call.
And for those of you that we're talking about the guilt call here, but for those of you who, why would you be aware? Michael and I take part and we help moderate a call along with our colleague Bob Drake, who does all the work, essentially does all of the research and compiles all of the research and all of the sources and stuff. But we manage a biweekly call, which is a closed call with global brand leaders. So people working in generally in the globalization, localization industry, but working on the enterprise side, working for a brand as either a globalization director, localization director, what have you. And we just have an open conversation about how are you dealing with a lot of the stuff that that's going on out there in the world, and how are you leading your team? How are you leading your brand in the global market? And it's closed because we talk about topics that are not always the type of topics that you want to talk about in polite company. We get into it here, but I think we're going to ease into this a little bit today. I think we're going to start talking about colors.
Yeah, there we go.
That's right.
Color is such a nice neutral thing that has no controversy associated with it whatsoever. So I think
we can find some if we look hard enough.
We can find some real easily.
Yeah. Oh, and really quickly, guys, like if you're watching this, we should be going live on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, all of that jazz. But if you're watching this and you would like to join in the comments, join in the conversation.
Absolutely.
We want this to be an interactive discussion. So there have you. So the agenda today: colors and culture. So last time we met in the closed group was last Friday, and we talked about colors and cultures, and it was really kind of I don't know. It was kind of anticlimactic because, like, colors and culture is kind of one of these things that I feel like it's like chapter 1 of every like localization textbook. It's
For
like
sure.
colors mean different things in different cultures.
Right.
But I have never worked on a project that actually involved changing colors. Depending, I've worked in this industry. I've worked in localization for a very long time. So that was kind of the conversation that we had, which is like, all right, like how much of this do we actually need to pay attention to, and how much of it is just like, all right, let's just leave that in the textbook where it belongs. But yeah.
You know, it is. I mean, you're really right. It is one of those things that is kind of like localization 101 in a way. You know, yes, colors mean different things in different places, and that is fairly obvious, I would think, for a lot of people. And that's, you know, so I can see where it would be maybe sort of an anticlimactic discussion. But I think there is a space to talk about something that is a little bit more that's a little deeper, maybe, and a little bit more relevant to a lot of people. I mean, the first thing I think of when I think of the color conversation is the move in the last few months. I was going to say last few years, although it isn't just post 2020, but to expunge vocabulary like blacklist and whitelist from you know, a lot of the terminology that's being used, especially in tech. And that, of course, directly relates to color and what color symbolizes, right? The black symbolizing evil or the thing that you don't want, right?
Yeah.
And white symbolizing the thing that you do want, right? Right. White hat, black hat, exactly.
But white hat, black hat, yeah.
You know. So, I mean, I think there is a place to talk about it that sort of goes beyond the, you know, in China, red is used for weddings, but in the United States, white is used for weddings, or that kind of thing. You know, I think there is something deeper because we can look at, okay, where do these associations come from? Where does this symbology come from? The whole black-white thing, I mean, obviously, especially in a United States context or in the context of the Americas, there's not just the symbology, but then there are the racial connotations that go with it. And so that adds an overlay to it that really needs to be addressed. But we can even look further back as to where some of that symbology comes from and really start to explore it. I mean, the whole white-black thing, that has fairly deep roots, for example, in Judeo-Christian symbology, which is why it's so deeply embedded into a lot of the discourse in the United States. But even that arguably came, you know, in Judeo-Christian and in the Abrahamic religions, that came from Zoroastrianism, where you had the god of light and the god of dark, and you know, the darkness was associated with the underworld, not the underworld like the mafia, but like, you know, the hell or
Tartarus,
whatever,
Hades,
right?
hell.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And I am sympathetic to the argument that we can look at, for example, the symbology of black and why people associate it with something not necessarily evil. Evil, I think, is a sort of latter day overlay, but why people associate it with something frightening or mysterious, because you think about the history of our species. I mean, electric lights are a fairly recent invention, right? And it wasn't until humans had discovered the ability to harness fire reliably that having any kind of light after the sun went down, if it wasn't the moon, was a fairly rare thing. And of course, the dark concealed dangers, right? You can't see if a predator is coming toward you. As humans, sometimes we forget we are part of the food chain. If you take us out of our houses, or don't give us something to protect ourselves. And so there is a legitimate case to be made for saying, okay, the dark is something scary, and having a set of negative, quote unquote, associations with that. Now, go extrapolating from that to skin color and saying, oh, okay, well, the dark is scary and contains predators that might eat me. Therefore, people whose skin is dark are also, now that's a leap that, involves a whole bunch of cultural and societal interpretations to get to.
There were some leaps that were made somewhere along the line in that
Oh,
process,
yes.
right?
Oh, yes. No, it is, there's a pretty long bridge you have to make to get from, there could be tigers in the dark that will eat us, to, black people are clearly evil. Like that is, there's a long ways you have to go. But I think it is important to, and this is not done in any way as some sort of apologetics for the racist application of this thought, but I think there is some use to looking at the origins of this symbology.
I mean, well, there's two different things to look at. There's the origin, and then there's the intent.
Right.
And I think you need to look at both of them, right? Because oftentimes they won't. Sometimes they'll be the same, but oftentimes they won't. And but let's get into this here. Let's get into the colors here. And you started talking about culture and religion, how different things mean different things in different things. And where is this infographic from? This is not a multilingual infographic. Do we know?
It is not. I do not know the origin.
I'm going to have to put a link to this in the description, because I want to make sure whoever did this, because this is just great. And so I want to make sure people get credit for this. But it really goes through by each culture and by each religion. So with cultures, we have Western culture, Far Eastern culture, Indian culture, Middle Eastern culture. Yes, there are more cultures than those four in the world, but this is what this infographic has. And then by religion, it has Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, and Islam. And some of these really speak to me, but some of them, it's like Judaism. Let's look at Judaism. Just pulling one out of random here. Red symbolizes blood, sin, joy, happiness, and life. So, Michael, if something symbolizes two polar opposite concepts, then how does it symbolize anything? You know what I'm saying? Like, if we get to pick and choose, because like you might pick up a red Bible and say this symbolizes the blood, and I might pick up a red Bible and say this symbolizes the sin or happiness or life, right? Well, I guess Judaism wouldn't use a Bible, but you get my point.
Yeah, it would use the Old Testament.
It'd use the Old Testament.
Yeah. No, I do get your point. I think, well, I'm going to have to answer this question sort of to split it off into two things. One, you say if something represents completely opposite concepts, does it really represent anything? Well, that's a legitimate question. And I think we can engage in an exploration of whether it really does symbolize anything if the concepts are diametrically opposed. But so let's put a pin in that for a second. I would then come back to the question of, before we can answer that, we need to establish whether those concepts are actually opposite or not, or is it just the cultural overlay that we're putting on it that says, oh, those things are opposite. Maybe from the cultural context that we're looking at, those things aren't necessarily opposite. I mean, let's even look at blood, right?
Sure.
Because blood can symbolize war, right? Because people bleed in a war, but blood can also symbolize life, because you can't live without blood. And so they're opposite, but they are intimately connected by, that's the thread that connects them.
Yeah.
Life, either the presence of life or the loss of life, for example. So sometimes when we're looking at things that would appear to be opposite, we have to look at, okay, what is this actually symbolize? What are the common threads? Or I'm so resisting the temptation to be ultra clever right now and say, what is the spot on the Venn diagram?
Oh, well.
But you see what I'm saying, though.
Save it for the second episode.
I will.
We're still working out the bugs here.
I peaked early. I really did. But where is that spot that those things connect? Where are the points of contact? And to me, I can see that with something like that. Now, that does leave open what we're saying, though. If something represents two totally different things, then does it represent anything? And I mean, that gets into the question then, if we're talking about localizing something, we use a color that can represent this one thing or can represent, I won't say the opposite, but we'll say the other side of that thing. What's it going to mean to the people seeing it? Which of the possible interpretations will they pick?
That's a good point. And I picked one. Excuse me. On the religion side, on this infographic has two sides. It has on the left it has culture, and on the right it has religion. And I'm always just fascinated by religion, so I go there. But let's look at the left side. So colors by culture. Picking one at let's do Western culture. Yellow, because that's one of my favorite colors. Nimsy color. Happiness, joy, and caution. Yeah. So this makes sense to me now, because like looking at it from my own culture, I perhaps couldn't explain to you how yellow can represent all of those things, but yeah, that speaks to me. Right? Because when I think of yellow, I think of happiness. It's a happy color. It's a bright color.
Right.
However, caution signs, like on the highway, if they want you to pay attention, they're yellow.
Right.
So not mutually exclusive.
Right. Exactly. And to me, the association of yellow with, and maybe it's because I grew up in Western culture, or mostly Western culture, that speaks to me as well. But I can see that association with happiness and joy because, right, yellow is the color that we color the sun. And we think, when it's sunny, we're happy, it's warm, all these kind of things.
Especially if you live here in the Pacific Northwest, where
oh boy,
you don't see the sun that often.
Exactly. You cherish it when you do see it.
Exactly.
But also the caution thing, like you're saying. But let's go to red in Western culture, because this becomes an example of
love,
and the reason
danger, action.
Exactly, love, but also danger, but also action. But
I don't see these as mutually exclusive. I see these as intricately interwoven emotions: love, danger, and action. If you're not doing all of three of those things, you're doing something wrong.
No, that's actually true. I was thinking like it's love, it's passion, but then it's also stop if it's a red light, right?
Right. Yeah.
So it's action, but it's also inaction, because it's the cessation of action is what red is supposed to indicate. But really, it's not directly indicating the cessation of action. It's saying, don't do this thing. It's saying, be aware, in other words.
Right,
like
awareness.
A heightened level of caution. Which, I mean, I can actually sort of see that, though, because, again, red can have that association with danger because of its association with blood. And blood is one of those things that, like, it can go so many different directions. You don't have life without blood, but if you see blood outside of you, it means something has gone wrong. So,
well, and then there's the whole Christian take on blood, right? Which means something completely, well, not completely different, but it brings a whole nother area of level of complexity into it.
Absolutely. And that idea of sort of intertwining the physical life-giving realities of blood with the spiritual understanding of life-giving through blood. So yeah, that is, I mean, that the whole transubstantiation thing, that's what that's all about,
Exactly,
really.
exactly. All right, so we've gotten through two of these. We only have about 30 more to go. Which one do you want to go to next, Michael?
Oh wow, let's
No,
see.
we're not going to go through all of these.
Oh, bummer.
Are there any
Man.
other ones that you wanted to call out though? Because I want to
No,
get to the in the news section. Remember when we had the
mhm.
agenda? We had the in the news.
No, I want to get to that too. I mean, there actually is a fair amount to talk about here, but no, I mean, I think we've touched on it to some degree or another, pretty well. So I'd like to get to the in the news part too, because that
Yeah,
was
but
interesting.
we also have this color wheel, also not a multilingual property. So we'll link to this in the description. If you guys probably can't read this, but this is super fascinating.
That does look interesting.
Yeah,
It's definitely. I know it's not a multilingual property because colors is spelled with the British spelling and not the
there you go.
American spelling. So I would have edited the U out. No offense to those who use British spelling, but I probably would have gone with the American convention.
As you should. We work for an American publication. In the news.
All
Let's do
right.
this. So this in the news section, guys. For those of you that are just joining us, like I said, this is the first time that we're doing this, so this is very much like a pilot episode of this. But we do these sessions every 2 weeks, and there's always leftover stuff, leftover topics, because we get really deep into conversations, and there's stuff that we just don't get a chance to talk about. And some of this in the news stuff is that.
Mhm.
And so we got 3 or 4 today. All right, explain this to me.
This is, and now this is one that hits close to home for me because a lot of my academic research
And
focuses
this is
on.
for, I forget that this is going to be a podcast probably too. So let's
Oh, that's,
describe
yeah.
the
Let's
slides
explain
here. Yeah.
what people are saying. So this is about the Maori people of New Zealand trying to save their language from big tech. And again, this a lot of my academic research focused on, a lot of it was historical linguistics, but one of my main research focuses is language retention and language loss in immigrant and diaspora communities. And because of that, underserved languages, under-resourced languages are really interesting to me, and what those communities are doing to save those languages. Now, the thumbnail sketch of this story is that basically there is a growing wealth of data about the Maori language that's being gathered, and some tech companies have approached the Maori groups and organizations that are gathering this data to say, hey, why don't you sell us some of it? Or, hey, you speak Maori, we'll pay you $45 an hour, I think was the price that I saw, if I recall correctly, to give us some samples of your language, spoken samples of your language for speech recognition. And that
So like
purpose.
audio recording.
Right,
Okay.
exactly. Now, what's the problem with this?
Well,
Well,
which is super interesting. Like I've worked on
yeah.
projects like that before, where someone's trying to train a multilingual
Mhm.
engine, so they need stuff to train it with.
Yep,
Right,
exactly.
and so typically they'll throw that at their supply chain. They'll throw that to their vendors, and there's vendors out there that specialize just in this. Right,
Mhm.
like I know Pactera Edge, right across the water from me here in Seattle area. They do a lot of that work where they're just tagging metadata and
Mhm.
training engines and stuff like that. But they also need to find the content,
Right,
right?
exactly. Yeah. No, if you don't have the data, you can't train the machine. That's how it works. I mean, you can sort of liken it to the human language learning process. If you don't have input to learn the language, you're not going to be able to learn it. That's just how these things go.
Yep.
So that's completely legit. The question sort of becomes then, and it's a multi-layered question: who should profit off of this? Because nobody owns a language, right? I mean, perhaps the native speakers of that language can
Well,
be said to own it, but
people may disagree with that because I see that as the question that
Mhm.
keeps coming up is we're talking about this question of can a language be owned by
And maybe
somebody?
maybe I'm wrong on that. Maybe it can. My instinct is to say the community of native speakers or people who live their lives, you know, for the most part in that language are the owners of it, but I'm open to arguments on the other side about that. I'm not even sure if language is ownable, though.
I'm not sure either. Well, I mean, I don't think there is a right answer, right?
Yeah,
And I'm open to arguments. As you said, that I was like, yeah, I'm open to arguments, but I'd rather have discussions than arguments
you're right.
because
Right.
I don't think this is because I think there are people out there arguing about this and they feel very passionately about this, and good for y'all, right? Like,
Right.
good, everyone's got a cause, right? But
Right.
it's fascinating because people don't see it all the same way, and
No.
you would never see this. You never see, France saying no. Microsoft can't use the French language. We
Right.
can't have access to our language and stuff like
Right.
that. But that's a good point of clarification, though. Are they saying they can't use the language, or are they saying that they can't have access to our data that we've meticulously collected? Because that's it, right?
And that I think is what we're getting into. And I think so. Two things here. One, I think we need to make a really, really clear distinction because there's few things that frustrate me more when talking about a contentious subject than people not being clear about what they say means. We need to make a really clear distinction between ownership or ownability, because again, I feel like it's an open question whether a language is ownable or not, and commodifiability. I think of it like this: nobody owns oxygen, right? Oxygen is just there and we breathe it. But you can commodify oxygen. If you compress it in a canister, you can sell that. You can sell the compressed air, the compressed oxygen to somebody. So it's commodifiable, but it's not necessarily owned, really. And then whether it's ownable or not, I think sort of gets into maybe a gray area there. The argument here is not necessarily saying no, you don't get to have this, so much as, well, I think the companies that have gathered it saying you don't get to have what we've gathered, but they're also saying, hey, when you go into our community and offer $45 an hour or whatever for somebody to give you that data, that you're then going to turn around and sell back to us, that's a problem. So
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
who is profiting off of it, I think, is really the central question here. Um, and I think it's more of a live issue, to go to your France example. The French, with the exception of in Canada, I will say, have to be fair about that, but the French have generally not had to worry about their linguistic resources being taken advantage of
Right.
by somebody more
They've
powerful.
got a few backup markets speaking their language.
Exactly.
I mean, an
Exactly.
asteroid could hit Paris today, and there'd still be countries all around the world speaking. Don't. And I know asteroids don't hit. Okay.
Nobody's wishing this will
Nobody's
happen. We're
wishing
just
this.
saying. No, you're right though. Like France, let's say it like this. France as a country could cease to exist. Again, another thing that we're not wishing for. But France as a country, you're right, could cease to exist, and that would
Not,
not spell. Oh,
no,
I'm
that
gonna
was
let
it.
you.
That
I'm
was it.
gonna
I
let you
forget.
take that smoke,
Bob
man.
Drake's not on this call. I have a hard. I have like a knee jerk reaction. I have to make fun of France when Bob Drake's in the room, and he's
I
normally on these calls just because he gets so worked up. I love the
No, I
French.
know. Hey, here's the thing. Bob and I met in France because my degree is in French, and
Oh,
I was
nice.
going to, we were going to school
We have
there,
yeah,
so
we have a lot of French
that's where we met.
speakers here at MC.
But even if France didn't exist, there would be plenty of French spoken in the world. Yeah. So this is
And
really,
archives, electronic and
oh yes,
otherwise, like the language
and
is not at risk.
literature, and that's the thing. This is more of a live issue for language communities that have been marginalized or minoritized in the past, that have been subject to punitive measures by larger powers. Maori school children, much like Aboriginal school children in Australia, much like Indigenous children here in the Americas, were beaten for speaking their language.
Yeah.
So until laws were passed, sometimes in living memory of a lot of people, to finally outlaw those practices. So this is essentially the Maori saying, hey, you beat us for speaking our language 50 years ago, and now you want to pay us a bare fraction of what you're actually going to make off of our language because you realize that it can be commodified. Is that really the right thing to do? So in a way, it's an argument about language. It's an argument about culture, but it's at its core, I think, an argument about historical and
It's about
current
power.
entrenched. Exactly.
It's about
That's
power.
what I was going to say. It's power. It's about
Sorry,
power structure.
I had to one up you and exert my power by beating you to the punchline.
Foucault would be proud.
Everything's about power. Everything's about power, right?
In
And
in a lot of ways, it does boil down to. I mean,
it's
I
not a bad
have
thing,
issues
right?
with Foucault as a philosopher, but I think he's right about that. A lot of things do boil down to power, and and you can look at a lot of things through that lens. Because if it were purely about language, if it were purely about culture, what you just said wouldn't be the case. There would be French people saying, no, 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 you can't do this, or you speakers of any other language. English speakers, right? I mean, Anglophones are clearly dominant in terms of having language spread.
I had a professor one time who was a very much, one of those sixth culture kind of people, like just spoke 19 languages and everything. And he came in, and I only was with him for 2 weeks in Germany. Mm-hmm. And he made a point that I will never forget, which is, and this is before I even ever heard the term localization. I was not a translator or anything, mm-hmm. but he said that the language that is going to get destroyed, he used a more eloquent word, I'm sure, but the language that's going to get destroyed the first is English, because it's the one that everyone's speaking as a second language. And when people speak as a language as a second language, they're not speaking the poetry. Mm-hmm. Right? There are very mm-hmm. few non-native speaking poets in any mm-hmm. language, right?
Very, very true.
So what
very
happens true. Is, the English, all of the colorful, the idioms and all mm-hmm. of this stuff, it slowly starts to disappear as people dilute the language. And mm-hmm. mind you, I'm not complaining. Mm-hmm. That's fine. It's just a phenomenon that happens. And There is research out there that shows like the complexity of language decreases mm-hmm. as adoption rate increases.
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
The most complex languages in the world are spoken by like remote tribes, mm-hmm. right?
Mm-hmm. No, that's very true. There's a fairly robust amount of research indicating that Old English lost the case system that it inherited from Germanic because of Saxon invasion, and a lot of non-native speakers starting to speak Old English, and they weren't familiar with the case system, and so they dropped the ones that were, and the weak and strong plurals that the Germanic languages are famous for. That was a little bit too, so a lot of it just sort of got kind of flattened out. And then of course we have the Norman conquests, and that basically made English a Germanic skeleton with French meat on its bones. But to give you something else to make fun of, I had to throw more French in there.
German skeleton. My native language, your native language, is a German skeleton with French meat on its bones. I love that. I'm going to steal that and use that.
Totally.
But it's a great case study for like what, because the question could be, what is the tribe so afraid of? I don't know if tribe is even the right word. What are the Māori so afraid of? And point end case. Mm-hmm. Point end case, right? There's a great video. If you're watching this, listening to this, I recommend you to go find it. From this gentleman Tehiku, or this company Tehiku Media. What's the guy's name? I don't think we have it on here, but they published a nice little video about this. It's available on Facebook, YouTube. I'm not going to play it because I don't want to. It's not my video. I don't want to get in trouble for that. But very interesting. And I just remembered tomorrow I'm speaking to somebody. I'm speaking to Lawson Stapleton from, where is he from? He's from ABC Multilingual, I think is the name of his company. And they do a lot of interpreting work over in Australia to serve a lot of Aboriginal communities over there. And,
wow.
Yeah, maybe I'll ask him about this, see if he has anything to add to the conversation. I also want to get this guy from the video on, maybe episode 2.
Yeah, that would be fantastic. That absolutely would, because this is a really, it's a complex issue. It's a rich issue, and I think it's really good when we're talking about these things to center the voices of the people who are potentially the most affected by it. Like this is the kind of thing where I want to hear somebody from the Maori community,
Yeah.
or somebody's say, hey, this is what we're feeling about this. And here's the thing, because I'm quite sure that the opinion in the Maori community is not monolithic.
Well,
right?
and I was going to say, I don't want to hear from somebody in the Maori community. I want to hear from multiple people in the Maori community, because I don't know, right? Like if you just asked one, just using the French example, if you ask one French person what their opinion is, it's not going to give you a good idea of what everyone's thinking. So
exactly,
and it's not clear, because we've gone through a lot of the published information that's out there already, and it's not immediately clear how much this attitude, this request, this demand has been adopted and supported by the rest of the community.
Right. Which is a really important thing to look into.
Yeah.
Because it's something that can affect the material situation of that community, right? Because it's about money. So this, depending on which way the community goes with it, that could affect their material circumstances. And that is something that I would say is completely within their right to choose one way or the other, but it will have an impact on them, and also, the voices deserve to be heard.
Also, though, who Tehiku Media? Tehiku Media, and just to read the first paragraph here, Tehiku Media gathered huge swaths of Maori language data and built language tech, including automatic speech recognition, speech tech. Tehiku Media, they're the ones driving this, right? This isn't the elders. Right? This isn't the social community preservation committee.
Right.
It's from what I can tell is it's a company with a financial stake involved in it,
and it's
a financial stake that they're entitled to. By the I'm not saying like they don't. They should, like, if they've gone through all the work of collecting this data on their language, they should be able to tell Lionbridge to say, no thanks, we got it.
Absolutely. No, that to say that they have a financial stake doesn't delegitimize their case at all. But it's something that should be made clear so that we all know what we're talking about, and we go into the discussion with a really clear set of who the players are, what each of them stand to gain from it, both immediately and maybe further down the road. But yeah, it certainly doesn't delegitimize their case.
I just realized, like, I haven't been switching scenes, so sorry guys if we've got the up on here. Any other notes before you want to try to get to some other ones here, Michael?
Yeah, let's see if we can get to a couple other ones. I mean, there will always be more notes on these things, but yeah.
Yeah, that's just the thing, right? It's interesting. Yeah.
You're all about France today, aren't you?
This is just sorry, I'm just reading. All right. Farmer moves 200-year-old French border with Belgium by mistake. This is okay. This is a nice little lighthearted one. I like this because we talk about race. We talk about this is nice. Farmer moves 200-year-old French border with Belgium by mistake. So a farmer moved 150 kilogram stone so he could extend the length of his land near the Belgian village of Erquelin. In doing so, he also modified the 200-year-old international border defined by the 1820 Treaty of Cordic. I don't know how to pronounce that. So the border was moved by approximately 2.29. I like how they say approximately and then round to 2 decimal points. The border was moved by approximately 2.29 meters, enlarging the southern Belgian territory and reducing the size of the French village of Bussigny-sur-Roc. Wow, that butchered that. The mayor of a neighboring French village said that if the stone is put back amicably, the country should be able to avoid a new border war. Well, that's very big of them.
I know, right?
So this is interesting, and this is just kind of one of those neat little feel-good pieces. But also, it's you made a good point when we were talking about this in the closed group, Michael. It speaks to, or maybe it was Bob, but it speaks to just how borders are defined, right? Like I think we have a tendency to take for granted borders are just, they exist. They're on a map. We learned them in school, but there's a lot of history here. At some point, 200 years ago, somebody sat down and said, "That rock right there, that's the border." and
Yeah,
everybody agreed to it.
absolutely. No, we can talk about this now, and clearly even the affected parties are talking about it in sort of a lighthearted manner. It's pretty tongue in cheek the
Yeah.
way they're talking about it. Because nobody is seriously considering having a new war between France and Belgium.
No.
So, but that's something that we get to say.
I'm
That's the
pretty sure
privilege of
America
living
would
in
get involved.
Oh,
That's just
probably.
what I was thinking. If France and Belgium went to war, the winner would be America. It's
Absolutely.
because we'd find a reason to get involved.
I was just I was just getting ready to took the words right out of my mouth. We'd find a reason. So, I mean, obviously, but this is the privilege of, it's an artifact of the privilege of living in 2021, right? That all of us can talk about this and be like, oh, ha, ha, ha. You know,
Yeah.
because I have this image in my mind of this farmer going out to the field and this rock keeps getting in the way of his tractor. And he's like, you know what? I'm freaking tired of this. And he just pulls it out of the way because he can. And then he goes on about his business, right? He pulls it off just enough to get out of his way and then he's done. Then he realizes, oh, hey, change the border by 2.29 meters.
Right.
But clearly, like you just said, and Bob said, this means at some point, somebody was willing to die over this. Right? This is a
Yeah, 200 years ago, you're right.
Yeah.
Like nowadays, it's like, haha, yeah, move it
Right.
back and we can avoid a war. 200 years ago,
Right.
I
No,
don't know.
200 years ago, this would have been like, okay, somebody's going to pay.
Yeah.
And it makes me think two things. One, that I guess really it all boils down to one thing, which is I always try to be conscious of what thing are we taking as deadly serious now that 100 or 200 years from now we're going to be like, oh, ha 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 ha,
That's a good
and
point.
just sort of laugh off. I try to take the long view on things, and sometimes even a longer view than what my lifespan is going to be. And I always try to be conscious of, okay, this thing that I might be really passionate about now, that I might be really willing to go to the fences for, in 100 years, in 200 years, is it even going to be a live issue for anybody? Will we have just moved on? Will it be so resolved in one direction or the other, or so supplanted by other issues that it's something that people just talk about in kind of a lighthearted way and be like, oh yeah, haha, that's funny. Of course, we're not going to actually do that, and then go on about it. And I don't even know what those issues are sometimes.
Well,
But
if we,
I always try to think of them.
yeah,
Say
if we
what?
did, we would be richer,
Oh yeah,
right?
right.
If I knew what the problems of tomorrow were going to be, I'd monetize that.
For sure.
But yeah, it's a really good point. It's like you said, 200 years ago, this was a big serious thing, and nowadays no one really cares about it. It's just kind of a ha-ha story. What is it today that we are taking so incredibly seriously? So incredibly seriously that 200 years from now is going to be a footnote, if anybody even remembers it, right?
Right.
Conversely, though, what is it today that we're not taking seriously enough?
There, I was just going to say,
Yeah.
that's the other thing, because history is rife with examples of counter examples where there were things that we didn't take anywhere near seriously enough, or we had a very interesting or attenuated understanding of, and now we realize, oh man, that was really a problem, and it has created problems that last into the modern era. So I mean, some of it, of course, is going to be dependent on new understandings of, well, let me sort of turn this around. Some of it's going to be based on a shift in relationships, right? Now, Belgium and France are both part of the EU. They're on amicable terms, so they can just sort of joke about this between each other. Back in the day, that wasn't the case, and so this was much more of a live thing, and a thing that people would have been willing to die for. But some of it's also based on different understandings of humanity and
Right.
who gets included in the moral community, right? I think a lot of it is that, things that were accepted to some degree or another, at least by the parties in power back in the day, are not acceptable now because we have expanded the moral community. We now understand, oh, just because somebody speaks a different language or looks different or believes different doesn't mean that we get to exclude them from our circle of moral consideration. Now, that's not everybody. There are there are some individuals and or groups who think, well, if you don't look like us, or if you don't speak like us, or if you don't worship like us, then that marks you as subject to some kind of lesser treatment, up to and including death sometimes. But in general, our general understanding is that those kind of differences don't exclude somebody from moral consideration. And so we look at things differently because of that. Something
Did we
I
just
think,
turn a story about a old McDonald moving a rock into like persecution and death squads? Jesus,
yes,
we just went.
yes, we did.
We took that went really quick, really dark.
I know it did, didn't
So
it? But the thing is, they're connected. They really are.
yeah,
Because it shows us how our ideas of who's our friend, who's our enemy, who's in the in group, who's in the out group, the those sort of anthropological considerations really affect how we looked at things then and how we look at things now, and what we're willing to go to battle for. I mean, really, if you want to look at it, I could see a future where, say, especially the discourse that existed in the United States between 2016 and 2020 about the wall with Mexico, I can see that being something that in 100 years, 150 years is laughed at, because relations
oh,
between the two countries have become so intertwined, and so, who knows, in 100 years we might have a North American union, just like there's a European union, and we have borderless travel between Canada, the US, and Mexico. That's a possibility, in which case, we would look back on it and be like, people literally died going across the Rio Grande. Like, there that was a thing that happened,
yep.
really.
Like
That,
wow, like why?
exactly. People go, why? What
What
were we thinking?
what's a border, Daddy?
Exactly.
Like
You used to have to stop driving from San Diego to Tijuana? Why would you have to stop?
exactly. What is driving? Like what?
Well, that's true.
Right? I mean, if you really
Driving.
want to be a futurist here,
Yeah, for sure.
um, yeah, yeah, I get it. We've got, we got 4 minutes left, and I just realized I am actually double booked. I'm supposed to be in another meeting right now.
Oh no.
So let's do one more. You want to do Cinco de Mayo, or do you want to do Five Eyes? Is the alliance?
Man.
Cinco
Okay,
de Mayo, I think we can wrap up pretty
let's
quickly
do
because
Cinco
it's
de
like
Mayo.
don't wear a sombrero, don't wear a. Yeah, this is a big part of like what we talk about on these calls are like, all right, here's this thing, it's happening, there's an event, just don't do this, right? Like make sure your brand, make sure your company, make sure you don't do certain things or do certain things.
Mhm.
Yeah, how not to be racist on Cinco de Mayo. All right.
And it really is. I mean, yes, okay, I know we have limited time, but I feel like this one is fairly easy. You're right. Don't wear a sombrero. Don't wear a poncho. Don't go out and drink a bunch of tequila or Pacifica and start getting really loud or something like that. And for the love of God, do not call it Mexican Independence Day, because it is not. Cinco de Mayo commemorates the defeat of the French army. It was the Battle of Pueblo, and it's really not even celebrated that much in Mexico. It's really just sort of celebrated in that state. Um, and it's certainly not Mexican Independence Day. Although I am impressed that you've managed to tie almost everything in these news items to France.
I pick a metaphor and I stick with it for better or
I
worse.
see
I
the
ride that
thread
horse
that
to
ran
death.
through. I
Yeah.
respect that. But no, it's when I used to teach French, I used to actually, if I ever had a class that fell on May 5th, I'd be like, all right, we're going to talk about this. You think Cinco de Mayo has nothing to do with France? Oh, it does. Let me just tell you. But yeah, like basically, because I don't think anybody has a problem with people who aren't Mexican or aren't Pueblan celebrating Cinco de Mayo. I think it's just understand what it is that you're celebrating,
Exactly.
and appreciate and respect it.
The whole point of holidays is typically, unless I misunderstand holidays, the whole point of holidays is to honor something, right? You don't just have a holiday for no reason. Those are called weekdays and weekends, right? So if you're going to have the holiday, like at least take the time to honor. And that honoring might just be thinking, it just might be knowing that something exists.
Knowing, exactly. Acknowledging, recognizing it. You don't have to honor it. You don't have to be like, yes, I am a proud supporter of either the French or the Mexicans in the Battle of Puebla. No, it doesn't have to be about that. But yeah, just know what it is.
Like you can still eat Taco Bell on Cinco de Mayo. Just know that that's not authentic.
Exactly.
Right? Just awareness. That's all we're talking about here.
Just awareness. Just like, these are delicious chalupas. and Viva Mexico in the Battle of Puebla.
Alrighty. Well, so we also, guys, have, and I gotta go, but thank you so much for joining us for it. This has been our first session here. We skipped this one. We're talking about China. But really quickly, let me read this. The Five Eyes Alliance, an intelligence sharing arrangement between the U.S., UK, China, U.S., UK, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. It evolved during the Cold War as a mechanism for monitoring the Soviet Union and sharing classified intelligence. In May 2020, the alliance agreed to expand its role away from just security intelligence to a more public stance on respect for human rights and democracy. 4 of the 5 members in this alliance recently jointly condemned China over its treatment of Uyghurs and expressed concern around China's de facto military takeover of the South China Sea, its suppression of democracy in Hong Kong, and I'm reading sources here, people. Don't get upset at me. Don't put your links in the comments if you want. New Zealand said it felt uncomfortable with expanding the alliance's role by putting pressure on China this way and prefers pursuing bilateral relations with Beijing. China's state media has made much of this, talking of a wedge having been driven between the two neighbors and allies, Australia and New Zealand. And while the trade war between China and Australia has been worsening, New Zealand has been rewarded with ever closer trade relations in China, where 30% of its exports are sent. Now, you understand, folks, why we're not going to be getting into this today, because there's a lot to unpack here. But these are the type of things that we discuss in closed groups. Because we can really get into specifics, not just about difficult topics, but also get into specifics about our individual companies that we work for, what we're doing without having the fear of breaking NDA and all of that stuff. But, sir, Michael,
thank you for setting this up.
Yeah,
I mean, I did very little work except turning on my computer and sitting down in my chair and studying these topics. You're the one who did all the tech work. Bob is the one who got all the information together. So
sweet gig you got.
Thank you. Thank you to you who did the actual work to make this happen.
Yeah. No, it's my pleasure. But you're going to be flying solo here pretty darn soon.
Let's do this.
So, guys, thank you very much for joining. If anybody joined today, this has been the pilot episode of The Venn Diagram with Michael Reid, where we talk about the intersection of language, culture, business, technology, and all the sorts of things that global leaders, particularly working for global brands, need to know to navigate international business. So, right. Thank you very much for your time. And with that, we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Bye, everybody.